Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 7th of August of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Kherson region. Yes, there were not many updates that took place during the previous day. The only piece of information we have is that, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of fierce fightings, artillery duels, attacking the Ukraine positions with the guided bombs, the Ukrainians lost around 20 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of losses is not so heavy in comparison with the previous days, so we can say that basically there was a regular normal day on the front line from Kherson to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Now we are going to the Vremivka tactical Britain to Orekhov, to Zaporozhye front line, to Orekhov front line, to the Bradley Square. There we got a lot of very interesting updates. Sometimes they were pretty opposite to each other. So let's start from the beginning. During the previous day, the Ukrainians made a few attempts to make some kind of reconnaissance in combat in this area. The Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions, at least from 3 directions. There weren't real offensive operations, just a small reconnaissance operation. The Russians, of course, were following the Ukrainian forces, and as a result of Lancet strikes, artillery strikes, and the Ukrainian armored vehicles were destroyed. And the only progress that Ukrainians managed to achieve took place, let's call it, on the eastern flank of Bradley Square. First, in this morning we got update that the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian Leopard 2A4 with the drone, and as a result of that kamikaze strike by the drone, that tank was destroyed. And probably that was the only update from this bridgehead, at least for some time, for some period of time. But later, somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time, we got very interesting video from the Russian sources, from the Russian soldiers who was making his video from trenches. He was the coordinator of drones, and basically on this video we can see a part of the front line. You see there's like the forest lines, the fields and so on, and the soldier, that coordinator, was saying and was giving piece of information to soldiers from his squad, trying to navigate and coordinate their strikes. And the people from internet have already geolocated this video, and according to the piece of information we have, this event took place in this area right on the north of Verbovo. And probably this is the most interesting video of today, because according to this video we understand that some Ukrainian teams, forces, were able to get Verbovo as close as possible. If we will increase the number of updates that we got since the beginning of this month of August, a few days ago we got update from the western part of Verbovo, the video how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian positions. This video is dated on the 3rd of August, so just a few days ago. And the author of this video claims that the Russians were attacked and bombed by the Ukrainian cluster rounds. So why I'm showing you this video, just to understand and to see the real Russian positions in this area. So basically, according to the video we got and from the Ukrainian source, how they were bombing the Russian positions, and from the Russian sources, how they were repelling the small Ukrainian reconnaissance team in this area, I understand that the area and the video of a Ukrainian tank that was destroyed by the Russian drone, the area, let's mark it, this area like this. So this area on the west of the destroyed Leopard, and to the south, right to the Russian counter-offensive operation, is at least in the gray zone, or at least under Ukrainian control. So this territory is probably in the gray zone, and Ukrainians do have possibility. But what does it mean, the gray zone? The gray zone means that there are no strongholds, but there are just temporary positions. I believe that this is exactly the situation about this territory. The Ukrainians do have possibilities to send their reinforcements, their reconnaissance teams, and today we were the witnesses of one of those operations, and the Ukrainians managed to bypass this territory, and they were stopped just in front of Verbovo. So this is the situation about Verbovo and the situation on the eastern flank of Bradley Square. The Russians reported that they reported that Ukrainians slowed down and reduced their activity in the vicinity of Robotyne. Probably the Ukrainians made some changes and corrections in their plans, or at least they're continuing or doing some kind of regrouping. The Russians took a decision to use the small operational pause from the Ukrainian side, and the Russians launched their own offensive operation in direction of the brushes and trenches that the Russians left during the previous phases of Ukraine counter-offensive operation, and the Russians, according to some information we have, managed to return control over this part of the field. So they just returned the temporary strongholds, temporary positions, started mining process, and started preparation of this bridgehead before the next Ukrainian attempt to attack that obviously will take place within this week or probably the next week. Also, the Russians published the video how they managed to destroy another Reco operation on the western flank of Bradley Square. According to the author of this video, the armored vehicle Bradley was destroyed. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 225 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system, not just in the vicinity of Bradley Square, but also in the vicinity of Vremivka tactical bridgehead. When talking about this area, we haven't received we haven't received any updates from this territory. There were regular offensive operations that the Russians managed to repel according to the Ministry of Defense and so on. The only interesting piece of information we got during the previous 24 hours is the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian accumulation of their forces in Velika Novoselovka, and after that the Russians, using the FAB 250, the guided bombs, attacked those positions. Yet we haven't received the numbers of Ukrainian losses, but I believe that tomorrow these numbers will be included in the next report of Ministry of Defense. The Ukrainians from their side are trying to suppress and to attack the Russian supply roads in the vicinity of Stara Mlynovka. On this video we see another episode of Ukrainian drone hunting. The Ukrainians discovered the Russian armored vehicle and basically, not the armored vehicle but tank, and after that the drone took a decision to attack the Russian tank. On this video we can see the results of that attack. Probably the tank was damaged but wasn't destroyed. If we increase the number of updates on this area, we see that Ukrainians are very focused on Stara Mlynovka because they understand that this is the main logistic hub, the main logistic area that the Russians use to supply and support their forces Unrozhaina in Staromayorska, that they obviously need to capture as fast as soon as possible. But yet the Russians were able to repel every single attack from the Ukrainian side. When talking about Ugledar, South Donetsk area, we haven't received nothing, and another interesting updates we got from Krasnogorovka. As a result of counter-artillery duels, the Russians managed to discover and to destroy another Ukrainian artillery positions in the west of Krasnogorovka. This is probably very interesting episode and very interesting area because the Russians currently are paying a lot of attention to this bridgehead. As I understand, currently the first phase of upcoming greatest offensive operation in direction of this settlement. Currently the Russians understand that they need to suppress and to destroy the Ukrainian artillery systems, the Ukrainian reserves, their supply roads. If we increase the number of updates from this bridgehead, we see that during the previous few weeks the Russians shown us at least 3 successful episodes of counter-artillery duels which led to destroy Ukrainian positions on this bridgehead, Ukrainian artillery positions. So for now we got very interesting, at least 3 types of updates. The first one, the Russians destroyed a lot of artillery systems. The Russians have already suppressed the Ukrainian anti-tank positions inside the settlement, and the Russians have returned and have managed to maintain the gap between the Ukrainian positions in Krasnogorovka and the Russian positions in Donetsk. So the Russians, one more time, have already implemented 3 successful before, let's say, pre-offensive, pre-storming operations. The next stage, the next step is probably the beginning of the storming of this settlement. So everything is ready. So we'll see when the Russians will be ready to do this. As I understand, the Russians will start storming operation in direction of Krasnogorovka. And not there is no real dates of this operation, there is just a signal, and as I understand the Russians will launch this offensive operation probably as soon as the Ukrainians will start offensive or another counter-offensive operation in direction of Ukrainian Krasnogorovka on the north of Avdiivka. So there are 2 Krasnogorovki, the first one on the north of Avdiivka, the second one is on the west of Donetsk. So both the Russians will attack the western one, the Ukrainians will try to attack the northern one. So probably these 2 operations will take at the same time. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fighting, artillery duels, clashes on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers, 11 artillery systems, including 2 tanks and 11 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks and 3 artillery systems on this bridge. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian artillery system Rapira, and as a result of artillery strike, they destroyed that system. When talking about Artyomov's front line, we got also a lot of interesting updates. As we discussed in the previous videos, the Ukrainians made a small attempt, probably of attack along the railways in direction of Yagidne, Berkhovka, Bogdanovka, but the Ukrainian forces were stopped among the fields and probably were completely defeated, and basically the Ukrainians haven't managed to got even the first defense belt. The Ukrainians were destroyed by artillery systems at the beginning of the passage of that movement. During the movement, the Ukrainians were attacked and destroyed by Lancet and Kub drones. As soon as the Ukrainians probably got the first defense belt, they started being attacked by the Russians' anti-tank missiles, and when the Ukrainians took a decision to step back, the Russians included in that operation helicopters and basically destroyed the withdraw and retreated Ukrainian forces by the missiles like Vikhr. On this video, one more time, we see how the Ukrainians probably got very close to the defense belt, but then they were destroyed by missiles, by artillery systems and anti-tank missiles as well. But the Russians continue reporting that there are still significant number of Ukrainian forces between Grigorovka and Bogdanovka. This is Bogdanovka and this is Grigorovka. So the Ukrainians continue their accumulation of their forces in this area. Probably this is some kind of operational reserve for this offensive operation, for the same or analogs of offensive operation that we saw during the previous few days. And so we'll see more and more attempts from the Ukrainian side exactly to attack in direction of Yagidne during the next few days, of course. And another attempt to attack the southern flank was made in the vicinity of Gorlovka. There was a very big video, at least 3 minutes of bombings and attacking from the Russian side of the brushes and the forest lines in the channel, which are completely fully loaded with Ukrainian infantry. So the Russians were trying to suppress, not to allow the Ukrainians to accumulate their forces and just to begin that attack. And probably by these artillery strikes, the Russians managed to break the Ukrainian plans and the Ukrainians plans to start something similar to the Bogdanovka and Berkhovka water reservoir offensive operation. And now we're moving further to the Liman front line. We got also a lot of very interesting updates. After small operational pause, the Russians started bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in the Kremenaya forest. On this video, we see how the Russians discovered the Ukrainian positions, and after that they start bombing and shelling the Ukrainian trenches, then the Ukrainian strongholds. This is the beginning of artillery preparation. This is the artillery preparation and probably the beginning of upcoming offensive operation from the Russian side in this direction. And the same video on the northern part of Kremenaya forest, the Russians discovered the Ukrainian positions during the night, and this is not just like missile attack, this is something like demining equipment. So during the night the Russians tried to demine the area, tried to demine the safe road before the next possible offensive operation in this area. And as I understand, after a quite long operational pause in this area, the Russians will start offensive operation, the new phase of offensive operation Kremenaya forest. But the Ukrainians, at least according to a piece of information we got, didn't waste their time for nothing, of course. During the previous weeks, they managed to complete some regrouping in this area, and the Ukrainians have redeployed in this area the first special purpose brigade. It's some kind of presidential brigade, as I understand. Also, the Ukrainians have, and probably that's it, yes, about the redeployment in this area. When talking about, one more time, Bakhmut and Artyomovsk, the Ukrainians have redeployed in this direction the forces of 101st Brigade for the protection of general staff or something like this. So there were a lot of changes on the map, some redeployments, some strategical or operational reserves were moved closer to the combat line and currently are involved in the main offensive operations in this area. Now we're moving to the Kupiansk front line, probably the most important and the most successful front line for the Russian forces. When talking about the Ukrainians, first of all, we need to mention that the Ukrainians have returned the 3rd Tank Brigade in this area. This brigade used to be located, according to the Western deployment map, on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, at least during the first phase of Ukraine counter-offensive operation. But when the Russians launched their own offensive operation in the vicinity on the area between Vilshana and Pershatravneva, the Ukrainians took a decision to return some operational or strategical reserves to this area. So basically now we can find 3rd Tank Brigade in this area, and we got also a lot of videos from this brigade. For example, this is probably the first video of that brigade that was published since the Ukrainians have returned that brigade in this area. The Ukrainians tank brigade managed to discover the Russian positions in the vicinity of Dvorechna and start bombing those positions with tanks from the hidden positions. So there are very fierce clashes. Furthermore, the Ukrainians have returned or redeployed their 101st Defense Brigade. This brigade used to be located on the western part of Ukraine. So basically this brigade was taken from the border between Poland and Ukraine and was redeployed in this direction. So the Ukrainians are sending more and more reserves in this area, tactical reserves, operational reserves, and even started sending strategical reserves to slow down and to stop the Russian progress. The Russians, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, reported that as a result of offensive operation in this area, the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead for another 11 kilometers in width, and for another 3 kilometers, let's say, in deep inside the Ukrainian bridgehead. So if we try to calculate the 11 kilometers, this is something like this. So this is like 10 kilometers, so probably the distance is a little bit bigger. So this one. This is the area that Russians managed to develop, 11 kilometers, and this is the, let's say, the broad frontline attack, and 3 kilometers inside the Ukrainian territory. So this is like 3 kilometers. So basically this territory was captured by the Russians during the previous 3 days, and basically the Russians have already got and reached the first defense belt and probably captured the first defense belt of Ukrainian forces on this bridgehead, and we're talking about this line. But there are still a lot of job to do. For example, the Ukrainians have more defense belts in this area. The first one is right in front of the defense belt that the Russians managed to capture. The second one is located below that area. This is not this one, but this is the second defense belt of the Ukrainian forces. And of course the main defense belt on the northern flank of Kupiansk is around Sinkovka, and on the west along Oskol River, and on the north of Sinkovka, and on the east along the road, this road. So there are still a lot of job to do for the Russians, but nevertheless, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to destroy around 110 Ukrainian soldiers and 5 armored vehicles during this operation. But the question is what the Russians are going to do next. The Ministry of Defense reports that the Russians are attacking along these positions from Vilshany to the south. The Russians attacks from Tokarevka. The Russians are trying to advance from Pershatravneva, but according to the Ukrainian sources, the main accumulation of Russian forces is located in the forest in the vicinity of Liman I, Gorbovka, Gryannikovka, Masyutovka. If we increase the number of updates that we got from this bridgehead, we're gonna see that the main focus of Ukrainian artillery system, artillery strikes, is located in the vicinity of Gryannikovka, Dvorechna, and so in this area. So basically this is the main accumulation of Russian forces, and probably the Russian attacks from the area from Alshany, Pershatravneva in direction of Petropavlovka is some kind of secondary operation. They're trying to force the Ukrainians to send strategical reserves, and they try to force the Ukrainians to think that this is the main direction of attack, but the main attack is going to take place somewhere in this area, and probably the Russians will try to cross Oskol River and to capture Dvorechna. So this is my understanding, this is my assumption. Because if you ask my opinion, I don't see any reason and purpose of attack from Alshany, Pershatravnevo in direction of Petropavlovsk. And the thing is that this is the fields, and basically the Russians can repeat the same story as the Ukrainians made in Rabotino. They can go on the minefields. They will be just destroyed between these fields. I understand that the Russians also understand this, and the only explanation I have about this offensive operation and these developments of the Russian side is to force the Ukrainians to send as much as possible reserves in this area. Meanwhile, the Russians will open another direction, will attack somewhere else, probably in the vicinity of Dvorechna, or maybe the Russians will try to advance in the vicinity of Novoselovsk in the direction of Berestova, because the Russians, after they captured Novoselovsk, started bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Berestova. They started attacking and destroying the Ukrainian artillery systems. For example, on this video we see how the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainian light truck, probably with ammo inside on board. And on this video we see how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian artillery system Gvozdika, and as a result of attack using probably the accurate shells like Krasnopol, with one shot they destroyed the Ukrainian artillery system. So we see at least two areas of artillery preparations in the vicinity of Berestova, and not like artillery preparation of Russian actions, and the second one in the vicinity of the Kupiansk front line. But anyway, even if the Russians, let's return back to this bridgehead, even if the Russians are able to somehow to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belts and to capture the settlements like Sinkovka, and to get, let's say, on the outskirts of Pershatravnevo, let's say if the Russians are able to capture this area, anyway, this situation is not going to solve the main Russian problems. This is going to be a progress, of course. We don't understand, I can't say about the price that the Russians will pay for this, but anyway, this bridgehead is not going to solve the main Russian issue. They are not, with this progress, they're not getting even closer to capture Kupiansk. To get Kupiansk, they need to start offensive operation from the north and behind the Kupiansk, not like in front. But maybe they have different purposes. Maybe they just want to force the Ukrainians to step back from Moscow, and they are not going to capture Kupiansk entirely, just the settlements around this area. So anyway, there's still a lot of job to do. Maybe the Russians want to cut the Ukrainian forces in Kislavka and Kotlarovka from supply, but for these purposes they need to get very deep in direction of N26 road, and basically to capture not just like Sinkovka, but the Russians for these purposes also need to capture Petropavlovka. And also a lot of fields, a lot of job to do, and this is not the operation of one day. This progress, these like two clouds that I have already colored in red, will take around a month or even two for the Russians to capture these territories. But we see the number of reserves that Ukrainians have redeployed in this area, and I'm not even sure that even 2 months is enough for the Russians to capture these clouds. Not because of they can't, but because of significant number of Ukrainian forces in this area, because of like drone attacks, because of like mining fields, because of fortifications and the strongholds. So one more time, I repeat one more time, I don't think that this is the primary Russian direction. This is the secondary one, and the primary one we're going to see very soon. And more updates are coming from the mainland of Russian Federation. Today some Russian sources published another convoy of T-80 tanks heading to the combat line. So as we discussed, the Russians currently can produce repair or modernize around 1,000 tanks per month. So this is a significant number of tanks that the Russians can produce. And furthermore, another interesting update we got from the northern part of Russia, from the Cosmodrome. And according to information we have today, the Russians launched the Soyuz 1B with military satellite from the Plesets Cosmodrome in the Arkhangelsk region. This is another satellite. This is another launch, another rocket with the satellites for military purposes. As I understand, the Russians are going to use these satellites for few things. The first one is reconnaissance operation in Ukraine, probably Niger, and the second purpose is, of course, to establish normal connection and internet for Russian troopers on the ground on the territory of Ukraine. So another thing, another plus, another benefit for the Russian army during the special military operation in Ukraine. And probably that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.